Welcome to Canada's source for college football, KCU. Later in the show, we'll have a preview of the RSEQ. That, of course, translates to Quebec. Our panel will deconstruct the biggest non-conference upset in decades. But let's get real with Ryan Sullivan.
Yeah, that's right, Jim. You can finally smell it in the air. It is football season, and we couldn't be more excited here at KCU. The OUA regular season kicked off over the weekend, and the defending Yates Cup champions, the McMaster Marauders, got tested early. Mac's roster turned over considerably this past year, with the last players from the 2011 Vanier Cup winning team now all departed. Would the Marauders stumble in Week 1 versus U of T? Let's head to T-Dot and find out. The Varsity Blues looking to take advantage of this young Mac lineup, and it's the Blues defense that steps up early. Wayne Moore gets bullied by a swarm of blue jerseys. Mac would have to settle with just a field goal. Late first Q, Blues QB Simon Nassar on the run fires an absolute bullet to Dominic Battistella. The two would then finish what they started, capping off the 4-play 67-yard drive. But then this happened. Mac's new starting pivot, Asher Hastings, shows off his cannon of an arm right in the hands of one of the best receivers in the nation and one of the best names in the country as well, Danny Van Der Voort. However, the VBs wouldn't go away. Devontae Smith, already with one major, scores a second. That put Toronto back in the lead. But then things would start to fall off the rails. Hastings looks to the corner of the end zone, and guess who? If you said Van Der Voort, you're correct. The clutch Dutch hauls in a second major. Mac goes on to outscore Toronto 31-7 in the second half and waltz to an easy 22-point W. Hastings was impressive in his first start under center for the Marauders, connecting on 76% of his passes while tossing 5 majors. 4 of those, of course, hauled in by who else? Danny Van Der Voort. I love saying that kid's name. Carleton and Queens. It was a hot one at Richardson, but it didn't stop this member of the band Guar from getting up to a little something before the game, looking sharp. First Q and the Ravens have their mojo working. Already up 7-blank, Jesse Mills fires a dart to Nate Bahar, and I'm pretty sure you can figure out what happens next. The 2014 first-team All-Canadian puts on the afterburners and takes it all the way to pay dirt. That lead wouldn't last too long, however. The Gales down 3 to start the second half, scored 17 unanswered, including this Mac truck of a run by Big Jesse Andrews, and this 50-yard bomb from Nate Hobbs all the way to Doug Corby. Corby and Andrews, folks, I'm telling you right now, watch out for those two this season. Queens opens the 2015 campaign with a bang, beating the Ravens by 10. Nate Hobbs was sensational in his first game, taking over for Billy McPhee. But the story of the game was Andrews' dominance on the ground and Corby's dominance in the air. The two put up over 100 yards each while scorching the end zone twice. Laurier and York. After scoring just 2 touchdowns all of last year, the Lions didn't take too long to score their first this time around. Prize recruit Brett Hunchak drops a bomb to Nate Pinto. Remember that last name. We might hear it again a little bit later. That's a 55-yard major. Laurier leads by just 1 score, but that's as close as York would come. The Golden Hawks tame those Lions by 17. New Laurier QB Eric Morelli with a solid game, tossing for 258 yards along with 3 majors, while OUA Outstanding Player of the Year in 2014, Dylan Campbell recorded his 10th straight OUA game, rushing for over 100 yards. Will Finch and the Purple Ponies opened up 2015 with a bang, drumming the Lancers by 69. Western had 7 different players score a major on the day. New Warriors head coach Chris Bertoya lost big time in his coaching debut, definitely one to forget. James Roberts handled most of the duties under center for the Griffins, but Laval transfer Alex Skinner did get into the game. The former Vanier Cup winner connected on 3 of 6 passes while tossing 1 major.
Gord Randall to my right, Sean Olsen to my left. Gord, the feature game in my mind in the OUA was Queens-Carleton. Queens kept Carleton out of the playoffs in the final game of the year last year. Why does Queens have Carleton's number?
Well, I got to say, I think the deciding factor in this game must have been the Queen's bans, which were present in Kingston as they always are, and were unsuccessfully banned by Carleton last year. I thought that Carleton was going to come into this game really foaming at the mouth to avenge that last weekend loss last year. They also haven't beaten Queen since 1995. Game started out pretty evenly. In fact, Carleton had a lead for most of the first half in this game, but eventually that Queen's young offensive line that we talked about a little bit last week started to take the game over and let the big hoss Jesse Andrews rumble behind them. And to me, that's the real big story in this game, Jim, is that Jesse Andrews and Doug Corby in particular were able to really take that game over for the Gales, whereas Nate Bahar on the other side had a long touchdown in the first half but wasn't able to make quite that much impact. So the superstars shone bright for Queens and were able to carry them over the top in this one.
Elsewhere, Waterloo took a beating, but both York and Toronto were in shooting distance in their games. Chris Bertoya is going to have to be patient here, Sean. But the Blues were in their game with Mac for a while. How encouraging is that for the Toronto Varsity Blues?
Well, I think Toronto's coming off a very good season last year. I think they've made some strides, and I'm looking for them to be competitive in almost all their games this year. The other two teams, York, I think is coming off a little bit of a disappointing season, obviously being 0-8 and only scoring 63 points last year. They've got their work cut out for, and I think the word for them is going to be urgency. With the Waterloo Warriors, I think Bertola, you're right. At the end of the day, he's got a young team, and he's trying to build some foundational sort of talent there. There's going to be patience, and I expect to see some strides, but I don't expect to see them being in the mix throughout the course of the year.
Speaking of beatdowns coming up, the UBC Thunderbirds march into Quebec and get a victory.
The CFL and our partners at Football Canada want to make sure we keep growing, promoting, and investing in a safe game. Hit! Football Canada now requires all amateur coaches to be safe contact trained by 2017. By creating a standard of safety for all in our football community, we're making an already great game even better. Make sure your youth coach is safe contact trained, because making a safe game means making a better game.
Welcome back to Krown Countdown U, or Upset Central. Ryan has more.
Yes, the last non-conference exhibition game took place last Friday as the Blake Nill-fueled UBC T-Birds took to the road, and it was a long road at that, all the way over to Quebec, where the T-Birds faced off against the mighty Rouge et Or of Laval. Nill hasn't had much luck in the past winning at Peps, be it in exhibition or championship games, but this time around, Nill has a new team that's loaded with a ton of new talent. Will that be the difference in changing the long-time fortunes for the coach? Laval are no longer the reigning Vanier Cup champs, but they still got a little bit of swagger. However, that swagger gets put in check quickly. Early second Q, Rouge et Or down 3-0. Punt the ball to the UBC 25, where Marcus Davis fields it. He looks to get the edge on the far side, and he finds it like a young Paul Bennett. He gets there, no problem. Davis proves why, as a rookie, he was picked as a first-team All-Canadian in 2014. He takes it 85 yards all the way home. UBC taking an 11-0 lead. Minutes later, T-Birds' new QB, Michael O'Connor, goes over the middle for David Mann, and man, he is gone. The UBC veteran receiver goes off, taking it 56 yards, just about to the house. Moments later, O'Connor hits another prized UBC recruit, Travell Pinto, for the major. That's the other Pinto brother we were alluding to. UBC is up 18-0, but that doesn't stop the Laval faithful from dancing the guy in the back. He's loving it, but he's certainly not loving this. Hugo Richard showing some preseason rust. Here he's picked off by Kevin Weens. On the very next Rouge et Or series, Richard gets robbed again, this time by Boise State transfer Taylor Loeffler. That sets up this 20-yard toss to Marshall Cook, and it's 27-0 UBC at the half. They are cooking. That's right, 27-blank for UBC. Second half, and Laval finds a little life. The Rouge et Or would put up 16 points between the third and fourth Q, but with under 5 minutes to go, the Birds put the game to bed. Weens with his second pick of the game, and it's a pick six all the way back to the house. It might have been just an exhibition game, but UBC putting up a huge statement win. They beat the Red Machine 41-16 in enemy territory. The loss was the first time Laval has lost 2 games in a row in 14 years. It's also the first time since 1998 that the Rouge et Or have surrendered 40 points or more at Peps. If this is a sign of things to come for UBC, look out for those Thunderbirds. Wow! Perennial favorites of the Canada West, Calgary Dinos and Regina Rams. Walter White with the official coin toss at the Methanex Bowl for this one. Calgary walking away with an easy victory.
Michael O'Connor has written another chapter in an interesting journey. While some in Quebec may be wondering about a sophomore jinx for Hugo Richard, what do you think of the performance of those two QBs in that non-conference game, Sean?
Well, it was a really interesting subplot to that game in the preseason with Hugo Richard going into his second year, coming off of an Outstanding Rookie of the Year award in the CIS. Quite often that second year is a little bit tougher. In your first year as a freshman, you're not always thinking clearly and things are just happening, and if it works out, it ends up being magic. If it doesn't, you got problems. But in your second year, there's expectations. So it'll be interesting to see how he deals with that. On the O'Connor side, he kind of did what you were hoping he was going to do. Coming out of Penn State, threw 2 touchdown passes, played his best when it mattered at the end of the half, and had some mistakes, but those things can be cleaned up. And I think all in all, Blake Neal's got to be really happy with his freshman pivot.
Lots of noise was made about UBC's recruiting coming into this game, but 2 months ago, Canada Football Chat identified Laval's recruiting class as the best in Canada until UBC up and passed them. Was this a battle of recruit versus recruit in this non-conference game?
I would actually say that it was not. And one of the things that really stood out to me looking at the stat line, the game recap, and I wasn't able to see much of this game live, but looking at that was the amount of holdovers that were standouts for the UBC Thunderbirds. Dominique Termanson on the defensive side, Kevin Weens on the defensive side, David Mann on the offensive side, all guys left over from my new colleague's old regime at UBC. And of the guys that were new guys coming in, we're not talking about fresh out of high school guys here. We're talking about experienced guys, transfers, guys like Taylor Loeffler and Michael O'Connor from the NC2A, guys like Marshall Cook from the junior ranks. This is not a story of UBC's recruits being more ready to play out of the gate than Laval's to me.
How does this set up these teams for the season openers? This is a very short week for UBC, having to travel back across the country on the Sunday and then set up for a team like Calgary on a Friday night. How much is the travel going to affect them?
It's not going to be easy. I know that was a consideration last year when we were trying to plan a non-conference game, and it was a challenge with our travel schedule and preparing in a 14-day preparation period leading up to your first game. So I know Blake's thought about it. I'm sure he's managed the schedule and the practice schedule, so I'm sure he's got a plan in place, but that's a long trip from Quebec City.
Even though Laval played a whole lot of starters in that game, scheme-wise, they didn't show too much, and I'm thinking that's because they play against the Montreal Carabin in a rematch of the Dunsmore Cup, Gord.
Certainly Laval approached this game like a team that's looking forward to a big-time game next weekend against their hated rivals. I know their starting running back didn't play a snap, although, on the other hand, Hugo Richard did play until there were about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter in this affair. The thing about Laval, though, is that they're not a team that is really known for out-scheming people to a large degree. They're a team that's known for out-skilling people and pounding them into dust. And that's why I was very surprised by this result. Despite whoever may have been playing for Laval or not, this is a program that has a reputation for 2-3 deep across the board, being better than just about any team in the country. So this is absolutely a surprising result. From Laval's standpoint, Glenn Constantine can't be happy, but at the same point, they may still have a lot of bullets in the chamber, and I know that anybody who probably had a nagging injury coming to this game didn't even suit up for Laval.
Yeah, but a 40 burger is still a 40 burger. After the break, we will preview the RSEQ. Stick around. Krown Produce secures produce locally and from around the world for Canadian retailers. Krown Produce is also proud to secure sponsorship of University football on Shaw. Krown Produce, supporting Canadian retailers and Canadian amateur football. We've been to the east, we've been to the west. Where do we head to first in Quebec, Sully?
Yes, we've covered off 2 conferences. Now let's head to the home of the Vanier Cup and check in with the Montreal Carabin. Gone are the days with the Laval Rouge et Or as the kings of the RSEQ. There's a new top team in the conference and the country, and that, of course, is the reigning champs, the Montreal Carabin. Back for a 5th year as quarterback Gabriel Cousineau, and he returns with a stellar group of offensive weapons. That includes Receivers Mikhail Davidson and sophomore stud Regis Sibasu expect the Caravan to be in the Dunsmore Cup for a third consecutive year, likely to face off against an all-too-familiar opponent. And by that familiar opponent, we mean, of course, the Laval Rouge, or the Red and Gold are arguably the best college football program, not only in the CIS, but in North America. To quote rapper T-Pain, all Laval does is win, 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 except for last year, mind you. After winning 11 straight Dunsmore Cups, Laval lost to Montreal, something that surely did not sit well with head coach Glenn Constantin this past summer. RSEQ All-Star Hugo Richard leads an offense that is always one of the best in the nation. They say there are only two guarantees in life: death and taxes. You can add a third to that list, and that's the Laval Rouge, or being in the Dunsmore Cup this November.
Does Montreal have a Vanier hangover, or do they simply pick up where they left off, Gord?
Well, the Vanier hangover is a real phenomenon. All your fifth-year guys leave that are usually core guys, plus all those fourth-year bubble guys. Generally, the vast majority of them leave as well. Montreal is in a good position, however, in that starting quarterback Gabriel Cousineau does return, which puts them off on the right foot to start out this season.
I'll tell you what, I think the Vanier Cup hangover it exists, that's for sure. And I agree with you, Gord. The big problem that Montreal is going to have is that it's easy to motivate yourself to climb a mountain. It's a little tougher to stay on top. That's what Laval's experienced over the last little while. And I think Montreal, we're going to find out what they're made of very early in the season if they can motivate themselves and come out of the gates the way they need to defend their championship.
Next up, the middle of the pack.
Quarterback Jeremy Rock is back for a fifth year. However, this might be the toughest schedule the senior has ever faced. The Ver-Aor play Montreal and Laval twice, plus a road game versus AUS champion Mount Allison in the Interlock. Things will get real really quick for the Green and Gold, as week one at Concordia could be the game that determines a return to the postseason for Sherbrooke. The Stingers got a new field, new logo, and some fresh new duds this year, and head coach Mickey Donovan looks to lead his team back to the playoffs for a second consecutive season. Top receivers Jamal Henry and Shane Stinson return to an offense that scored close to 26 points per game last season. Facing Montreal just twice will be a tough task. However, 4 games versus McGill and Bishops should make the Stingers at the very least a 500 team this season.
At one point, he was called Jeremiah the Messiah, but the transition from Bolduc to Lassard at head coach during Jeremy Doyon-Rock's tenure has not moved Sherbrooke into the top 2. Is there any chance of an upset along the way, Gord?
I would say that chances of an upset are slim tonight. I see a divide, a big-time divide behind Montreal and Laval in this conference. And whereas the storyline has been for many, many years, when's somebody going to take the next step to join Laval? Now the storyline shifts to when's somebody going to take the next step to join Laval and Montreal, and I don't see it happening this year.
Mickey and Pat Donovan at Concordia last year broke the east-west recruiting path by extending some of their recruiting efforts to south of the line. How much of a payoff is there in going after American athletes if you're a Canadian school?
Well, I think last year they had upward of 15 Americans on their roster at the start of the season, and this year, by their own account, they have 7. So I think they've learned their lesson. I learned that lesson when I was at Simon Fraser, that the Americans are typically picked over when you bring them over here. So they're not the cream of the crop that you think you're getting. Quite often, they're a lot more expensive. And when you look at the sum of all the parts that you're getting in those American players, quite often it's much more efficient to stay north of the border and invest in Canadian kids.
Next up are purple and red, better off dead.
New head coach Ron Hilaire leads a group of 43 players that are returning. That's the good news. The bad news is that inexperience is what will keep the Redmen out of the playoffs once again. Like McGill, Bishops are in the midst of a 4-year rebuilding cycle, and also like McGill, unfortunately, the bottom of the conference is where you will also find the Gators this season.
Last season, I had the opportunity to talk to Clint Utley, the former McGill coach, when I was out on the road about their exhibition game between themselves and Toronto. He said the Redmen controlled every aspect of play, and you flip to this year, and it was just the opposite. All kinds of turmoil for McGill in the offseason. When you're a new coach like Ron Hilaire stepping in, how do you manage that, especially when you come in late like he did?
Well, I'll tell you what, that is a difficult situation. You get hired in the middle of February to take over a football program, even though he was an interim head coach there during that hiring process. That is a very, very difficult thing to undertake. And with Ron, he's going to have a tough time managing the new recruits coming in, setting a culture, and getting that team prepared the way that he wants to prepare them heading into this season. So it'll be interesting to see how they play early. I think they'll pick it up midway through the season and have a better showing as they get their legs, but that is a tough go when you're hired in February.
Gord, are we seeing a Bishop's team who is a small school just riding that 4 to 5 year cycle, and this is only year 2 of it?
Well, I don't think that in the Quebec Conference it needs to be a 4 to 5 year cycle. Now, it may depend on the teams around you and stuff like that, but when you have Cégep in your backyard, you should be able to reload every 2 to 3 years. And Bishops has not really shown the ability to do that in the last decade or so. So I'd like to see if they can turn that recruiting cycle from a 4 to 5 year thing into a 2 to 3 year thing and set themselves up for success a little bit more frequently than they have been lately.
Before we go to break, here are the games that are in your own backyard.
The CFL and our partners at Football Canada want to make sure we keep growing, promoting, and investing in a safe game. Football Canada now requires all amateur coaches to be safe contact trained by 2017. By creating a standard of safety for all in our football community, we're making an already great game even better. Make sure your youth coach is safe contact trained, because making a safe game means making a better game.
Number 10. Number 9. Number 8. Number 7. Number 6. Number 5. Number 4. Number 3. Number 2. And number 1. It is preview time. Games to see across the home and native. Gord.
Well, Jim, you're testing my journalistic objectivity week after week here, but a very interesting matchup goes on in Ottawa as Queens, coming off defeating the other Ottawa squad, Carleton, travels in to face the GGs. And Queens has historically had their struggles with this GG squad, so I'm really keeping my eye on this matchup. GGs have not played yet. They had a bye week 1, but they returned their stud quarterback, Derek Wendell, under center. They also returned Mac Tommy in the backfield behind him, so that'll be a challenge for Queens on defense. As for this Queens squad, the question becomes, is this a well-rounded squad that can compete with the big boys, or is this a mediocre squad being carried by a couple of big superstar types like Doug Corby and Jesse Andrews? That's what I'll be watching for this weekend, but I hope that Queens will squeak one out on the road.
The battle of the two superpowers in the Quebec Conference is going to be very, very interesting to see. You're going to see Laval coming off a huge defeat at home versus UBC playing Montreal. This, I think, is going to be a little bit of a tale of two teams heading in slightly different directions. I think University of Montreal, who has been on the uptake for the last 2 or 3 years, will continue that uptake, and Laval's going to have to rebound from a very, very difficult and controversial defeat versus UBC at home, something that doesn't happen very often. So it'll be interesting to see how Coach Constantine will get his team ready to play, and if that was the true Laval team that played on Saturday afternoon.
Well, I have an embarrassment of riches to choose from in the Canada West. Regina, Alberta could determine a program's playoff fate right in week 1. Blake Nill returns to Calgary with a UBC team coming off their win in Quebec City, but they'll be facing a much tougher Calgary Dino defense. But my pick is the game many of you will see following this show. That's Manitoba at Saskatchewan. Brian Doby has something that may be the envy of many across Canada. That's an actual defense loaded with performers. This game will come down to Teo Dizar's ability to manage the football for the Bisons. On the Saskatchewan side, you cannot tell me that there is not pressure on the Huskies after last year's playoff implosion to the herd. Fourth-year starter Drew Burko will have to rely on more than just Mitch Hillis to get it done. I suspect this will be a lower scoring game than past clashes between these two. By the way, we're still looking for the Harvest Bowl, guys. The trophy for this game last seen about 4 years ago, leaving Griffith Stadium. I think we will never see it again. Next week, it's the first edition of X's and Olsen, where the coach will break down key plays from the week that was and our AUS preview. But now, it's time to get to the game.